Feday.email, you don't need to compromise faith to participate in the modern world. Instead of pushing ads and invasive practices that conflict with Catholic values, we built Feday to reclaim technology for Christendom. When you use Feday.email, you declare your commitment to technology that defends Christian tradition. Join Feday.email today and use technology to advance Christendom.
Pope Francis has been very busy in his recovery in Casa Santa Marta, appointing new bishops to American dioceses while other bishops continue to restrict access to the traditional Latin Mass. So let's start with a story making waves in the last few days. I have gotten messages from people about this. And, well, let's talk about the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest leaving the Diocese of Oakland April 20th, right before Easter. You will not have a traditional Easter liturgy at that parish. Traditionis Custodes, and the document that came with it that restricted the traditional Latin Mass, made for a couple of things. It allowed bishops to restrict how many Latin Mass offerings there were in your diocese, and it also suggested to them that the traditional Latin Mass be shut down entirely for things like Christmas and Easter, and forcing all those meanie-headed, rigid clericalist traditionalists who want the same liturgy, same religion, same mode of worship, same devotions, and all the rest of it, as our great-grandparents had, and force them to go to your ordinary form parish, which may have a clown mass or a middle-of-the-road kind of, yeah, there's liturgical abuses happening in this mass, but at least it isn't openly heretical, or a at least reverent appearing mass. They want them to do that because those documents have one explicit purpose. They say in them that the goal is to get meanie-headed traditionalists to go back to the Novus Ordo and to shut down the traditional Mass entirely. That is the goal of it. And in Oakland, we have this announcement from the Diocese of Oakland. Following an official visitation of the parish, Bishop Michael C. Barber, S.J., a Jesuit, has assigned the responsibility of providing Mass in the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite to the pastor of St. Margaret Mary Parish in Oakland, effective April 20th, 2025. The Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest has long asked for, quote, their own church to celebrate extraordinary form Masses, rather than sharing a parish church. The Institute is now providing the extraordinary form Mass in the Most Holy Rosary Chapel at St. Vincent's Home for Boys in San Rafael, and will seek a new location for this and their other ministerial works in the very near future. Since the Oakland Diocese has enough properly trained clergy to provide the traditional Latin Mass to the faithful, Bishop Barber has requested the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest to leave St. Margaret Mary to find a more suitable setting for their apostolate. For the time being, the Institute will provide a priest to celebrate the regularly scheduled extraordinary form of the Mass at Most Holy Rosary Chapel. I'm grateful to the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest for serving the needs of the traditional Latin Mass community in the Diocese of Oakland since 2005, the bishop said. We now have more than enough diocesan priests able to fulfill this very worthy spiritual need. At the same time, the Most Holy Rosary Chapel at St. Vincent's School for Boys in San Rafael is a spectacularly beautiful church and provides a fitting setting for the traditional Mass. We pray for God's blessings on the Institute in their pursuit of this new chapter in their ministry. I laugh when I read that because that reads exactly like a letter I got, like several letters I've gotten in the past when looking for jobs. No, thank you. We'll move on. And good luck to you in your future endeavors. That's what that letter reads like. It's a very administrative letter. If you're not familiar with the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest, they are known for their extraordinarily beautiful traditional forms of the Mass. Their music that they do, their offering of the Mass is light years different than anything else. It shocks the conscience when you see the reverence and the beauty in it. It puts to shame those claims of like irreverent Novus Ordo Masses. And they're being kicked out of the diocese. And one of the reasons that they are being kicked out and replaced by a diocesan priest is diocesan priests are much easier to control for the bishop. That's why. So when the bishop inevitably says, well, Traditionis Custodes requires us to modify the traditional Latin Mass in the following ways, the diocesan priest will obey. The FSSP, Institute of Christ the King priests, are much less likely to just do what they're told on this. That is one of the things that has been happening. Meanwhile, the Diocese of Omaha in Nebraska is getting a new bishop. That diocese is often thought of as one of the more conservative dioceses in the United States. It's probably because of its association with Lincoln, actually. But here is an update on this because some people have questions. This is posted by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops on their X account. Pope Francis accepts the resignation of Archbishop George Lucas of the Archdiocese of Omaha, appoints Bishop Michael McGovern as successor. They have a full press release. We're not that interested in it. People want to know what to expect. Well, here's what you can expect. Somebody did some digging. I verified this is all true. On the 1st of July, 2016, Cardinal Blaise Cupich appointed Father McGovern, pastor of St. Raphael, the Archangel Parish, at Old Mill Creek, Illinois. On July 22nd, 2020, Cardinal Blaise Cupich ordained and installed Bishop McGovern as the 9th bishop of the Diocese of Belleville in the Cathedral of St. Peter. Your new bishop in Omaha is a creature of Cardinal Cupich. If you're wondering what to expect, that should give you an idea. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a full-throated Bergoglian. Pray for your bishop, and pray for your diocese. Now, we have this from Catholic News Agency on this subject. Under the headline, Pope Francis appoints Bishop Michael McGovern to lead the Archdiocese of Omaha. And you're going to get some details here. There's your new bishop. And I will just tell you right now, if you are wondering if a creature of Cupich is going to be anything other than a Cupich type, while I just told you that it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be, he has been promoted repeatedly by Cardinal Cupich. You can infer some things from this. From the article, quote, Pope Francis on Monday appointed Bishop Michael McGovern of Belleville, Illinois, to lead the Archdiocese of Omaha, Nebraska, after he accepted the resignation of Omaha Archbishop George Lucas. McGovern, 60, has led the Diocese of Belleville since April 2020. The Chicago native will be installed as Archbishop of Omaha in the Cathedral of St. Cecilia on May 7th. He succeeds Lucas, who submitted his resignation when he turned 75 in June 2024, as required by canon law. Lucas has led the Archdiocese of Omaha since 2009. McGovern is the youngest child of a large Catholic family. He grew up in Chicago's Beverly neighborhood, where he attended Christ the King Parish and grammar school and was an altar server. He was ordained a priest in 1994, and in 2020 was named Bishop of Belleville, Illinois. The Archbishop designate of Omaha is a member of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. Since 2021, he has served as a state chaplain for the Illinois Knights of Columbus. In 2022, the Diocese of Belleville announced it would sell the historic mansion that had served as the bishop's residence for over 70 years, with the majority of the proceeds being used for a diocesan maternity fund for expectant mothers. I hope to live more simply, and as a pastor, I believe that proceeds from the sale of the home can be better used in helping pregnant mothers in need, assisting families seeking a Catholic education, and providing programs for our youth, McGovern said about the decision to sell the property. End quote. You know, I don't have a problem personally with any of that. If bishops feel driven to live more simply, that's fine. Just don't start doing that with the all your Catholic properties, all your really gorgeous, beautiful properties in your diocese in some sort of act that puts you in line with Judas Iscariot. This move was celebrated by Pastor Jimmy Martin on X, and he said something to the effect of Pope Francis is filling in all the vacancies in the United States. And this is true. There's a whole host of bishops in the United States who are past retirement age. And he has been relatively quick in the last month or so filling these vacancies. And there are reports that he could barely sign his own name to documents, but he was still doing it while in receiving hospital care with a breathing mask on the verge of meeting our Lord. He was still doing it, almost as if he feels compelled to fix the problem of the bishops in America. And there's context to that. A day or so after the presidential election in November, a story came out that Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal McElroy and Cardinal Tobin, all of the United States, all the biggest Bergoglians in the U.S., among the U.S. bishops, met with Francis in Rome. And they discussed the state of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, not as a lobbying organization, but as their membership, that there were a whole host of these bishops who were past retirement age, and that something needed to be done with it. And this was his opportunity to remake the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And that's an important thing to remember, because before that meeting, it had been spoken about for years that the bishops in the United States were far more conservative than those elsewhere, that they were too rigid, too opposed to Francis, not so much in your face opposition, but they just did not implement his ideas. And that now this was their great opportunity to correct a problem. And that problem, ladies and gentlemen, is bringing the U.S. Bishops' Conference more in line with the goals of Francis and the Bergoglians, the Jesuits mainly, running the church out of the Holy See, out of the Roman Curia, the super force, as Malachi Martin called it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what's happening, and this will not be the last story you hear like this of bishops being appointed who are tied to Supich or McElroy or the rest. It was announced a couple weeks ago that Cardinal Supich suddenly has a whole crop of new auxiliary bishops. If you don't know where bishops come from, your bishop started out as a priest. And whether he was working in Rome, as often is the case, and offering masses and doing basic priestly duties, but was never running a parish, and then they get promoted to being a parish priest, or they get promoted to being an auxiliary bishop somewhere, or they start out as a parish priest somewhere, they get the approval of their bishop and become an auxiliary bishop. An auxiliary bishop is an assistant bishop. They do things to help their bishop or archbishop in their diocese, because dioceses in the United States are geographically large areas. I'm not one who thinks we should have break up the dioceses into smaller geographic areas, because a lot of dioceses in the United States are large areas geographically, but don't have that many Catholics in them. I live in one of those kind of dioceses. Our archbishop is able to drive around just fine to get to where he needs to be, but he has auxiliary bishops who will go visit parishes in his stead, who will do things like perform confirmations and other sorts of things. But the auxiliary bishops pool is where your future ordinaries come from. A few years ago, Father Robert Barron became Bishop Robert Barron of a rather first being an auxiliary bishop in Southern California, and then being made the ordinary of Winona in Minnesota, I think. It's only a matter of time before he's moved to become an archbishop, if he's been remotely competent in running his diocese. And I've not heard any horror stories out of his diocese, so I would assume that he's at least competent in what he's doing and will probably get promoted for it. That is where they come from, though. They come from the pool of bishops, and the McElroys and the rest are getting a whole bunch of new auxiliary bishops right now. This is a long-term plan to turn the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops from being super conservative in post-conciliar sense of the word to something more manageable for Francis. I'm curious what you all have to say about this. How many bishops in America started out or were trained in Chicago? That I'm not sure, but Supich's name keeps coming up a lot. In Chicago keeps coming up a lot in these stories. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was a high number, relatively speaking, of recent promotions. It would still mean a small percentage overall, but the larger the diocese, the more auxiliary bishops are going to have. All right, folks, I'm curious what you have to say about this, though. So let me know in the comments, please. Make sure to pray for the good people of the Diocese of Oakland, as their traditional masses are basically taken away from them or being put in charge by somebody more easily malleable by the bishop. Even if the priest is a good priest, he will still feel duty-bound to listen to what his ordinary tells him to do. And when Traditionis Custodes tells them to, explicitly says to alter the substance of the traditional Latin Mass, they're going to have a hard time resisting, if they put up any resistance at all. So please pray for the good people of Oakland, and pray for the priests who have to resist these things. And pray for everybody we spoke about today in this video. I'm not here to whip you up in anger against these figures. Please pray for their salvation. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.